to that? Does he get that part?
Take a giant lead ball 100 feet in diameter and make a tiny 1 inch in diameter lead ball, go towards the giant lead ball. I believe you. There's gravity.
Sorry, what was that? Can you say it again?
Take a giant lead ball, whatever it is, the biggest object of the most mass that you could possibly imagine, and take a small object and make that small object go towards the larger object by virtue of its mass alone.
Right, but do you understand that the force of gravity is very small, and therefore you need very, very, very big objects to show the effect to the scale you're talking about? Do you understand that mass is proportional to the mass, and the gravitational constant G is so small that you need enormous amounts of mass before you can have a major effect? Do you understand that?
You should tell that to Cavendish, because when Cavendish did this experiment, he would stand outside of the barn nearly 100 feet away, and he would go into it. He would look through a telescope through the barn, because he didn't want his own gravity to interfere with the test. So if gravity is so small and it does absolutely nothing, and it's such a small amount of force, then why would he even bother to stand outside if it's such a small negligible force?
It's not negligible, but
stand right near it.
Not negligible. Matter of fact, we can measure the amount of gravity between two particles. It is something that's measurable.
Right, so we can measure this.
Right, but how can your gravity interfere with the test if you can't get a giant lead ball of 100 feet in diameter and take a small lead ball or whatever and of like a centimeter in diameter, and you can't make it go towards it? But a human being just going near the test, it's going to affect the test. Oh no, it's going to everything's going to be wrong.
So you think in your head. So you think in your head that because we can't get a small ball to sort of, I don't know what, go along the ground, roll along the ground towards another big ball, you think that's on the same scale as the Cavendish experiment? You think those two things are comparable, do you?
The Cavendish experiment, I think the difference in weights there was only 216 times.
That's right, but did you know the deflection? By using a torsional balance, you're magnifying the effect many hundreds of times. Whereas to drag something across, a ball rolling along the ground, that requires many orders of magnitude force greater to do that than it does to twist a torsional balance with a very, very the finest string you can possibly have. The differences in the forces are huge. You're talking about, and it seems to me you don't seem to understand the math. Basically, I suspect you're not very good at maths, because if you knew the maths involved, you would know that those two things are not equivalent. You would not expect, from knowing the Cavendish one, to expect the second effect you talked about of a ball rolling towards a big lead ball. That is not what the math says.
I don't think we can call him a flat earther anymore. I think he's an anti-gravity person, because
that's a good point. It's not
have yet to hear one bit of evidence for the fucking flat Earth.
Well, the flat Earth.
They do this though. This is a common feature, I'm afraid, of them.
Using that term null hypothesis wrong. You don't know what the null hypothesis is.
Excuse me. Okay, so let's Google null hypothesis.
I know what null hypothesis is.
The number one result.
I think everybody else.
The number one link. The number one link, besides the Wikipedia link, the number one link goes to an article about the null hypothesis. Anybody watching could do this right now. It's a website.
You can also Google gravity.
It's a website.
You're going to buy gravity now.
It's a website called statisticsHowTo.com.
Rotan, let me ask you this.
And it gives you an example.
Rotan, listen to me.
Oh, you just shot yourself in the foot there, my friend.
When you have a null hypothesis, right? Can you ever accept a null hypothesis as being true when you do an experiment? Can you ever accept it?
Well, it's assumed to be true before you disprove it.
That was my question. And no, it's not. But if I'm doing an experiment, right, and I have my claim and I have my null hypothesis, can I ever show by experimentation that null hypothesis is correct? Is that how it's done?
While you think about that, Frankie, find me a how-to article about gravity, because he said that's the reference that he's using for the case that he's making right now. I went on that same. What article did you say proves the null hypothesis?
Just go to Google null hypothesis. Number one result is statisticsHowTo.com, and they give an example of what the null hypothesis is.
Okay.
And they say the number
I guarantee
one
you, how-to will also give you an example of gravity. Are you going to accept that then too?
So let me, again, I don't want to get away from this answer. Can I ever accept the null hypothesis?
Well, if all the other experiments fail,
what would that require to you?
If all your other experiments try to disprove that null hypothesis failed, then I guess you could assume that it's true.
Okay, then you have no idea how experimentation works, or how a type 1 or type 2 error in experimentation works, how you fail to reject the null hypothesis, what it means to reject the null hypothesis. We have a statistician that is a friend of mine in the live feed that's probably fucking having a coronary right now, because I can tell you right now, there is no person on this planet that has taken statistics or done any kind of experiment that is listening to you that's not cringing and going to have sleep deprivation for the rest of their lives because of what you just said.
But I think there may be somebody that can help
Rumpus,
him.
you agree?
Let's go ahead and bring him in.
One thing, you do not necessarily have to have a null hypothesis for all experiments. It's basically normal for statistical things.
You can never accept. You can never accept. You only reject.
Yes. So, for instance, you tend to use null hypothesis. Like, for instance, if you've got a drug and you're doing it, and you want to do a statistical analysis whether the drug is having the effect on people dying or having disease, then you need the null hypothesis that it's not going to do anything, and you need to establish through a statistical analysis that something is happening with your drug. But for some experiments, like for instance measuring gravity, you don't really need a null hypothesis. You've got an effect. You can establish an independent variable relationship and say, when I do this, I get this effect. For that, you don't really need a null hypothesis. Only really for sort of statistical analyses of things where there's a dispute about whether there's actually an effect taking place.
And I also have another PhD in biology. He says we're exactly right as well. So.
Rumpus, we need to bring you in on a where your knowledge can actually be used, because I fear that what you're offering to the table is not being in any way considered, and I think that's a shame.
And like I said, Brian Stevens, who's a statistician, says he is referring to you, Wotan, is 100% wrong on what the null is. You can't accept the null; you can only fail to reject it, which is something that myself, Rumpus, and everybody else is trying to explain to you. But you don't seem to get the concept of that.
I mean, let's go back to things like the curvature of the Earth. I mean, if you're in things like the fact that we see a sunset, for instance, it's definite proof there's not a flat Earth. The fact that you can see the dip to the horizon. The fact you see, for instance, like the sun illuminating clouds from beneath. With the rotation of the stars in the sky, the fact you get a north and a south point. On a flat Earth, for instance, south points in lots of different directions. Yet we know that when you go south, you end up at the same point. On a flat Earth, like a disk, going south can take you in all sorts of directions. On a flat Earth, for instance, you would be able to see both sides of the moon. They think the sun is only 3,000 miles high. We can show that it isn't. You can, as I said before, you can see two sides of the moon, and also, of course, it doesn't account for the seasons. I mean, there's just a plethora of reasons why the flat Earth can't work. And also, I said the angular size of the sun would have to change as it went round you. We know that it doesn't change size. So we have observable things that you can do yourself to show that the flat Earth can't be working.
But he won't even defend those. Like, he won't even defend a flat Earth position. Like, I have never seen this in my life. I have yet to hear one example of what makes him think that the Earth is actually flat versus.
Who do we got in here? We got John or we got KC? The other KC.
We got John.
What's up, heathens?
What's up, John?
Yeah, I mean, you just need to be denying science. Basically, his tactic is all these experiments that are being recorded in the academic literature, they're not true. It's basically his argument. He's yet to put a positive case.
Right.
That's all he's
If
doing.
gravity doesn't exist, then the Earth has to be flat because the only reason why it's round is because of gravity. So
it's not a reason.
But we can measure gravity, Wotan. We can measure. We've got experiments to
measure
do
a lot of things.
You're in denial of science. You're in denial of experimental physicists over hundreds of years.
Rumpus, hang on. Let me ask one quick question before we get John in here, because I want to hear what John has to say. So, Wotan, let me at least ask you this. If I wanted to know what I would expect to see in a given situation, could we not use gravitational physics to determine what I would expect to see? And it doesn't even have to be with gravity. It has to be like special relativity as well. We can, as Rumpus will know, that certain experiments done with muons, we can detect how long they decay, and we use special relativity. Can I use math to say, okay, this is what I would expect to see under these situations? No matter if space-time bends or whatever, if reality is all wrong, could I not use those equations to make predictions?
Whatever you call that force, you think it's mass attracting other mass. I don't think it's mass attracting other mass.
That's not my question. My question is, if I wanted to say, here's an atomic clock on the Earth, here's one in space, I'm predicting that this atomic clock should measure this. Yeah. Could I not use the mathematics to make that determination before I do the experiment and see if there's a relationship, regardless of the reason behind it, right? But you can't assert that that's because of the Earth's mass. Okay, but the physics works. Right.
Do you accept the experiment gives that result, that the time goes more slowly on higher up you go? I mean, but the trouble is you deny this science. You deny all these experiments have done this. Your only answer is to say, I don't believe it. Well, we don't really care that you don't believe it.
The Cavendish experiment is the most ridiculous thing. This guy did this experiment over 250 years ago in a barn. Yeah. He only came 1% within the values. For it. Only 1% within the values that we have now with the world's most advanced machining technology. You look at these machines.
No, he was within 5 or 10% of the value. You're wrong.
Wotan, I think you can actually buy a home kit to do the Cavendish experiment.
Yeah, you can do it yourself, Wotan. You can do it yourself in your own bedroom.
John, you want to like dive into this? I'm sure you're like got something to say on this.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of curious, like, what is I think maybe I've been editing a video, so stop me if this has been asked, but is it Wotan?
Wotan.
That's right.
Wotan?
He likes Wotan.
Wotan. What is a flat Earth experiment that we could run that definitively proves like a flat Earth, like on the order of, I guess, like gravity? For instance, there's the Cavendish experiment. There's a Coriolis effect that we could do that would prove the Coriolis effect proves the spinning of the Earth. But I'm just kind of curious, like, what kind of experiment could we run that would validate the negation of gravity? Because, like, if you go back to the basic fundamental laws of motion, if you have a mass of anything that is just sitting there motionless, then it's going to stay at rest. And it's only until it's acted upon that it moves. So what we need to figure out here is what force, in your view, is causing things to move. Like here on Earth, with scientifically minded people, we have the mass being affected by gravity, and that's why it falls down towards the Earth. It's being pulled by the immense mass of the Earth towards the center of it, and it's being pulled in a measurable way. We have the law of gravity where we can measure that force. Huh?
Right, but what you can measure the acceleration of an object, but you can't assert that the Earth is what's causing that acceleration.
Well, no, okay. Well, I mean, that's not what I asked. As it applies to the fundamental laws of motion, what force in your worldview is causing things to fall down?
That's a great question. What is that for?
Well, I asked him earlier this very thing.
Yeah,
he told me it was electromagnetic and electrostatic. We never got
but he said that they could be. He didn't say that it was.
Well, I mean,
what I would say is just, what I love to say is that I don't know, and just because I don't know doesn't mean that gravity is true, and it doesn't mean that you know. So I like to say things that I don't know rather than me claim that I do know, and then I could be wrong.
That's the start.
You don't know. That's the first true thing you've said so far. Yes.
Yeah, I got no problem with what he just said, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, I have no problem with you saying I don't know, but you cannot also pair that with gravity does not exist.
I just don't believe that. I don't believe that space-time. You cannot combine space and time into one thing. That's what I don't believe about gravity. That's the precipice. That's the very beginning.
But basis for this. All you do, you've no basis for that. You just simply assert it and you reject all of these experiments. All these experiments, the body of science says things, and you simply reject them. You can't do that.
Prove space-time.
You're saying that space-time does not exist.
No, because you can't combine space and time. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
what the hell
Minkowski
is that?
did it quite many years ago.
Prove it.
Have you ever seen a Minkowski diagram?
Okay,
I long for the days where I used to hear ATP synthase.
That was space-time.
Those days.
Okay, so Votan, do you know what atomic clocks are?
We've been down this road.
Well,
and the fact they change as you go up higher. We've been through all this, and he seems prepared to accept that they will change their behavior as you go increasing in altitude. And I had to explain to him that this was due to the fact the gravitational field had decreased as you went up higher. But he then didn't really get beyond that.
Right, but you could assert that, or it could be, maybe there's
it's not asserting it. It's experimentally verified and measured. It's not just asserting.
Gravity.
Do you understand the difference, Votan? Do you understand the difference? He's not making a claim that can't be proven.
Well, okay. So Votan, to you, what is an atomic clock?
What is the basis behind it? Why they're able to measure time on a
Say those 3 words, and just be honest, Votan.
Yeah.
Say those 3 words.
Yeah, I've heard of it plenty of times. I just don't know how it works.
Okay, good. That's good.
I don't know.
That's good.
Right, but do you accept there being experiments on it that show that the time changes as you change in altitude?
But hang on, let's see what the atomic clock does. I mean, I
don't think we need to go into how it works. We just need to know that the clocks change, what they do, and difference in altitude. That's all we need to know. And then we need to know whether he accepts experiments have been done on that, and it's been verified, measured, repeated, and it's been established, and whether he's prepared to accept that or not.
Right. Well, okay. So atomic clocks.
Hold on. He stopped him from answering that question. Does he accept that atomic clocks or any clock changes passage of time with increasing altitude because it's been measured experimentally?